A man who spent 30 years driving fast cars for a living bought 1,000 acres of Cotswolds farmland. He expected to film a show about tractors. He ended up filming the slow demolition of everything the public believed about where their food comes from. By the end of season 1, he stood in a field and said one sentence that farming journalists had been writing for decades without anyone listening. He'd worked, in his words, bloody hard all year. His reward was 144 pounds, not 144,000 pounds. 144 pounds. Say that number out loud and it sounds like a mistake. It isn't. It's real. It's been quoted in Parliament, and it explains more about British farming than any government report published in the last 20 years. Here's what almost nobody outside farming understood before that moment. Profit and survival are not the same thing on a British farm. You can work every daylight hour, grow a full harvest, sell every bag of grain, and still end the year with less money than a teenager makes stacking shelves on a Saturday. That's not a Clarkson problem. That's the industry. The Scottish Farm Business Survey found that once you strip out subsidies and outside income, the average British farm was running at a loss of around £9,000 a year. Not underperforming, losing money, every year, before a single subsidy payment lands. But here's where it gets interesting, and where most people watching got the story wrong. Clarkson's farm didn't just make $144 in profit. Over 3 years, it also received more than £25,000 in government and EU subsidies, 1,33733s through the Basic Payment Scheme, 11,652 pounds through environmental stewardship. The internet did what the internet does. Millionaire, taking public money, complaining about farming. Except that reaction missed the actual story completely. Clarkson wasn't the exception. He was the example. Every farm his size in Britain runs on exactly that formula. Grow the crop, sell it for barely more than it cost, and survive on subsidy payments that were never designed to make anyone rich. They were designed to stop the country's food supply collapsing. The uncomfortable truth Clarkson's farm put on primetime television wasn't farmers are broke. It was bigger than that. The entire British food system has been quietly running on life support for years, and almost nobody in a supermarket aisle had any idea. Now stay with this, because the story is about to stop being about money and start being about power. In season 2, Clarkson tried to open a restaurant in a converted lambing shed, using his own beef, so the farming business could finally pay for itself. West Oxfordshire District Council rejected the plans. Twice. In August 2022, they shut it down. To the council, this was a routine planning decision. To 10 million people watching it unfold week by week, it was something else entirely. Proof, in real time, of exactly why British farmers can't diversify their way out of poverty even when they desperately want to. It wasn't a personal grudge against one man. It was the system, working exactly as designed. And that was the problem. The farm shop survived. The restaurant didn't. That gap between the two, one shed still open, one shed shut down by council order, became the single most repeated example of planning bureaucracy in British farming for the next 2 years. Farmers who'd never watched a single episode still knew exactly what the Clarkson planning row meant, because it was their planning row too. It had just never been filmed before. Then something happened that almost never happens. The story walked off the television screen and into government policy. In May 2024, new legislation landed, officially the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Amendment Order. Almost immediately, planning solicitors, farming publications, and the government's own farming minister started calling it something else. Clarkson's Clause. The new rules doubled the floor space farmers could convert from agricultural to commercial use without planning permission, from 500 square meters to 1,000. They doubled the number of homes a converted farm building could create, from 5 to 10. They opened the door to training centers, storage, and small commercial ventures that used to take months and thousands of pounds in fees to even attempt. The farming minister at the time, Mark Spencer, said the changes would cut what he called needless bureaucracy. Downing Street's own spokesman confirmed on record that the reform was a direct response to what he called a high-profile example of the exact problem farmers had been raising for years. Read that again. The government admitted on the record that a television show about a man failing to keep his sheep alive moved planning law faster than a decade of industry lobbying ever managed. James Rebanks, a working sheep farmer who has spent his career writing about the reality of British agriculture, said it plainer than any headline could. Clarkson had done more for farming in one series than 30 years of the BBC's Country File. That's not a compliment about production values. That's a working farmer admitting the industry's own advocacy had failed for 3 decades, and it took a celebrity with a Lamborghini tractor to finally make the public care. There's a second thing the show exposed, quieter, and it matters more than the headlines let on. Farming has one of the highest rates of isolation, debt-driven stress, and mental health crisis of any occupation in Britain. Most of it happens miles from anyone who'd notice. The show didn't dramatize that. It didn't need to. It just left the camera running long enough for viewers to watch a man's optimism get worn down, season after season, by weather he couldn't control, prices he couldn't set, and a council he couldn't reason with. Almost by accident, that opened a national conversation about rural mental health that campaign groups had been trying to start for years. There's a third thing, and it happened quietly, in supermarket aisles rather than in Parliament. Waitrose reported measurable sales increases in exactly the products the show kept putting on screen. British sirloin steak, Jersey Royal potatoes, red Leicester cheese. Not because of an advertising campaign. Because people watched a man fail, succeed, and finally sell a product he'd grown with his own hands. And something about seeing that process made them reach for British instead of the cheapest import on the shelf. Nobody scripted that as a call to action. It happened because the show made the distance between farm and plate visible again after decades of branding worked hard to make people forget that distance existed. The National Farmers Union noticed too. In 2021, after one series, they named Clarkson their Farming Champion of the Year, an award usually reserved for people who'd spent a lifetime in the industry, not a presenter 8 months into owning a tractor. It wasn't really an award for skill. Clarkson has openly admitted he lacked it. It was an award for attention, because attention was the one thing the industry had been starving for. And attention has a way of finding real people and making them matter. Kaleb Cooper wasn't hired for the show. He was already the farm manager at Diddley Squat before Clarkson bought it. Nobody cast him. He was simply the person who already knew what he was doing, and the cameras happened to be pointed at him. So stand back. Look at the full picture. This was never really a show about a celebrity buying a farm as a vanity project. That's what it looked like from the outside, and that's exactly why nobody in government or media took it seriously at first. What it actually was, the most effective piece of agricultural policy advocacy Britain has produced in a generation, made by accident, by a man who openly admitted he didn't know what he was doing. The council thought they were enforcing a planning decision. They ended up rewriting national law. The farming industry thought television couldn't move a bureaucracy that had ignored it for decades. Then 10 million people watched a shed get shut down, and 18 months later the planning rules changed for every farmer in England. That's not luck. That's what happens when the public finally sees, in plain and undramatized terms, a system that was quietly broken the whole time. Whether that changes the deeper economics, the $144 profit, the £9,000 average loss, the dependency on subsidy payments that could shift with the next budget, is still an open question. Planning law is easier to fix than commodity prices. Nobody in farming believes the hard part is over. But something did change. Farmers who spent years being invisible are, for the first time in a long time, being watched. And in an industry that runs on razor-thin margins and government policy nobody outside it ever reads, being watched turns out to matter more than anyone expected. If you found this genuinely useful, consider subscribing. I'd honestly love to know in the comments, did any of these numbers surprise you as much as they surprised me putting this together? And if you're connected to farming in any way, what's the one thing about the industry you wish more people understood? Thank you for watching, and subscribe my channel.